Khanpi. Gak betul sepi orang gak betul.
Temu po.
Jadi kat jam dong nah.
Try ko he ke kak to na. Gam hat dan saya.
Welcome to ZalengamMedia. In the unfolding chapter of Manipur's continuing turmoil, the Khanpi Operation on 4 November 2025 stands as one of the most contested and symbolically charged security actions in Churachandpur district. The incident, which resulted in the death of 4 members of the United Kuki National Army, UKNA, has drawn a torrent of responses from all sides: official agencies, armed groups and civil society organizations, each presenting a sharply distinct interpretation of the same event. What transpired in the early hours at Khanpi village now represents a microcosm of the larger conflict in Manipur, a conflict that has stretched from political aspirations to questions of legitimacy, justice and survival. According to the Government of India's official press release through the Press Information Bureau, Defence Wing, the operation at Khanpi was based on credible intelligence. Security forces, including the Indian Army and Assam Rifles, reportedly conducted a pre-dawn operation targeting cadres of the UKNA, described as a non-SoO suspension of operation, insurgent group. The release stated that armed militants opened fire on the advancing column, leading to an exchange of gunfire in which 4 UKNA cadres were neutralized. The statement emphasized that this was a counter-terrorist measure aimed at protecting local civilians and maintaining regional stability. It linked the operation to earlier incidents allegedly perpetrated by the same group, including violence against village authorities and threats to peace in adjoining areas. For the Defence Ministry, the Khanpi encounter was an illustration of the state's determination to confront militancy that operates outside the framework of ceasefire or dialogue, reinforcing the commitment to restore order in the troubled hill districts. However, the version presented by the UKNA in its own press release stood in sharp opposition. The organisation condemned what it called a cowardly and premeditated attack on its cadres while they were asleep. Its statement portrayed the operation not as a lawful military engagement, but as an act of betrayal executed in collusion with local informants. It described the deaths as unjustified killings, urging the Kuki population and the Indian Army to recognise what it framed as a moral wrong. The UKNA narrative placed the incident within a historical continuum of persecution, tracing its roots to the ethnic violence of 2023, the forced exodus of Kuki people from the valley, and the breakdown of inter-community trust under the previous state administration. The organisation reaffirmed its stated goal of achieving a separate administration under the Indian constitution, and claimed that it does not consider itself a threat to national security, but a political movement seeking dignity and autonomy. The juxtaposition of these two statements reveals the core of Manipur's current discord: 2 competing notions of legitimacy. The government's interpretation situates the UKNA as a lawless armed actor whose violent methods justify counterinsurgency operations. The UKNA's view, on the other hand, situates itself as a political defender of an oppressed community, portraying the operation as an attack on the dignity and collective aspirations of the Kuki people. Between these poles stands a landscape of loss, fear and political vacuum, where truth becomes refracted through the language of loyalty, identity and power. Amid these conflicting narratives, a third voice emerged through the joint statement by Kuki civil societies of Churachandpur. Their release expressed collective sorrow and condemnation over the deaths, offering condolences to the bereaved families and calling for restraint from all sides. While the statement did not explicitly endorse any militant group, it conveyed solidarity with the Kuki population, linking the tragedy to the broader demand for a separate administration as the only sustainable political resolution. The societies appealed for an end to bloodshed and for mutual restraint by both security agencies and armed groups. Their announcement of a total shutdown and district-wide mourning symbolized a social rather than military resistance, an act of collective mourning that doubled as political assertion. Through their lens, the Khanpi killings were not merely operational outcomes, but human tragedies rooted in decades of political neglect. Another perspective came from the Kuki Inpi Manipur, KIM, the apex body of Kuki organizations. In its official condemnation, KIM described the Khanpi Operation as an act that caused immense pain and indignation among the Kuki ZoO people. The statement questioned the selective nature of security enforcement and argued that such actions erode trust and jeopardize ongoing peace initiatives. KIM reiterated its commitment to dialogue with the government of India, but warned that continued military pressure against one community undermines the credibility of peacebuilding. It called for impartiality, justice, and sensitivity in state response, urging the government to treat all armed aggression equally and to prioritize political solutions over militarized enforcement. These 4 documents, issued within the same day, illustrate the deep fracture lines that now define Manipur's post-2023 conflict environment. Each statement carries the tone of its constituency: the state's insistence on control, the insurgents' claim of victimhood, the civil society's plea for peace, and the community leadership's demand for justice. None of these perspectives alone captures the entire truth. Rather, they overlap and contest within a space of fragmented authority. The Khanpi Operation becomes, therefore, not just an isolated counterinsurgency episode, but a reflection of the larger impasse between the state's narrative of law and order and the ethnic community's narrative of survival and dignity. From a neutral investigative standpoint, the sequence of communication also reveals much about the relationship between the state and society. The government's press release came first, establishing an official interpretation framed in the vocabulary of neutralization and commitment to peace. This language, while standard in military reporting, positions the event within a counter-terror paradigm, limiting space for alternative interpretations. The UKNA's immediate rebuttal, using emotive language of betrayal and sacrifice, sought to reclaim moral ground by invoking collective suffering and historical grievance. Civil society and apex bodies entered the discourse thereafter, not to contest the facts of death, but to reframe the moral implications. They redirected the discussion toward political causes, emphasizing the failure of dialogue and the need for separate administration. An analysis of tone and intent across these statements also reveals how the communication battlefield mirrors the physical one. While the government emphasized professionalism and protection of civilians, the insurgent and community organizations appealed to identity, justice, and historical continuity. The government's statement was brief, structured, and operational in tone, reflecting institutional authority. The UKNA's response was longer, emotionally charged, and politically embedded, reflecting a desire to articulate its legitimacy within the Indian constitutional framework, while distancing itself from terrorist labeling. Civil society statements, meanwhile, used conciliatory but firm language, projecting themselves as moral arbiters in a conflict where violence has become cyclical and justification layered. The Khanpi Operation also brings into focus the fragility of the suspension of operation, SoO framework. While UKNA is identified by the government as a non-SoO group, the line between groups under and outside the SoO arrangement has blurred since 2023 due to the proliferation of local defense and volunteer forces. This ambiguity allows space for both operational actions by the security forces and retaliatory narratives by armed groups. The state views such operations as necessary enforcement against those who reject dialogue, while communities often interpret them as targeting of particular ethnic or political identities. The result is a mutual erosion of trust between security institutions and the population they claim to protect. At the ground level, the impact of such operations extends beyond military calculations. Reports from local networks indicated widespread fear among villagers in the adjoining areas following the incident, as well as spontaneous shutdowns that reflected both grief and quiet defiance. For many in Churachandpur, the operation was less about insurgency than about symbolism, a reminder that the promises of buffer zones and political negotiations remain unfulfilled. The silence that followed in Khanpi village is emblematic of the wider exhaustion that has settled over the hills. In the longer view, the Khanpi Operation reveals the crisis of governance and communication that haunts Manipur's conflict zones. Each side seeks to control the narrative, Yet the cumulative effect is fragmentation. While the security forces celebrate tactical success, community groups mark collective mourning. While the government asserts peacekeeping, the local population perceives provocation. This dichotomy feeds a perpetual feedback loop of retaliation and justification. From a neutral analytical perspective, one can observe that the Khanpi incident underscores three realities. First, militarized responses in ethnically charged regions often reinforce rather than resolve perceptions of exclusion. Second, insurgent and civil narratives remain deeply intertwined. Armed movements often draw moral legitimacy from civilian suffering. Third, without transparent investigation and inclusive dialogue, every operation risks becoming another symbolic wound in the body politic of Manipur. The Khanpi Operation also tests the credibility of India's federal response to the Manipur crisis. While the Defence Ministry's communication asserts professionalism and intelligence-led precision, questions linger about accountability, rules of engagement, and the human cost of such missions. Civil society calls for independent inquiry have yet to find traction, and local distrust continues to grow. For policymakers, this operation thus becomes a reminder that tactical victories may come at the expense of strategic peace if political grievances remain unaddressed. For the Kuki community, the deaths at Khanpi feed into a collective narrative of sacrifice and endurance. The mourning declared by local organizations transcends the immediate tragedy and becomes a statement of identity resilience. For the government, meanwhile, this operation is a message of resolve, that no group operating outside the constitutional and ceasefire frameworks will be tolerated. Between these two positions lies the space for negotiation that remains suspended between rhetoric and reality. ZalengamMedia observes that the Khanpi operation reflects the dual failure of dialogue and deterrence, the government's reliance on military instruments, the insurgents' insistence on armed identity, and civil society's oscillation between advocacy and protest all demonstrate a deeper structural impasse. The crisis is not only of arms but of trust, where every statement becomes both defense and accusation. The tragedy of Khanpi lies not merely in the 4 deaths, but in what they represent: the persistence of mistrust, the politicization of pain, and the elusiveness of reconciliation. In the days following the operation, silence became the dominant language across Churachandpur. While security agencies continued their search operations, the community gathered for prayers, funerals, and reflections on yet another moment where peace seemed just out of reach. The competing press releases continue to circulate online, shaping perceptions far beyond the actual site of the operation. They have become textual battlegrounds, where every phrase reinforces a worldview. Khanpi, once a small and quiet village, now carries the weight of a national conversation. Its name has entered reports, statements, and appeals, a reminder that in Manipur's continuing conflict, every location becomes a symbol, and every loss becomes political. As the government reiterates its commitment to peace, and community organizations repeat their call for separate administration, the people caught in between wait for justice that feels tangible and peace that feels permanent. Sources: Government of India Press Information Bureau, Defence Wing, release dated 4/11/2025, United Kuki National Army, UKNA, Department of Home Affairs Press release dated 4/11/2025, Joint Statement of Kuki Civil Societies of Churachandpur dated 4/11/2025, Kuki Inpi Manipur Press release dated 4/11/2025. Background contextual references from ongoing coverage of Manipur conflict, 2023-2025. Disclaimer: ZalengamMedia. This report is an independent analytical interpretation based on officially released and publicly available documents. It does not endorse or oppose any organization or government agency. All materials are used for informational and educational purposes to promote understanding of ongoing issues in Manipur's conflict landscape. ZalengamMedia maintains neutrality, encouraging dialogue, peace, and factual reporting. Subscribe to ZalengamMedia for more detailed, balanced analyses and verified conflict reports. Stay informed, stay discerning,